Hello and welcome to Full Disclosure, a podcast project conceived entirely to let me spend much more time than I'd ever got on the radio with fascinating people. Mark Gatiss, welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Bloody hell, you've done a lot in your career.
This morning.
That's unbelievable. We're barely going to be able to touch the sides of it. I was stunned, but we will begin at the beginning, which is in Sedgefield, a town probably best known for being Tony Blair's constituency, at least to outsiders. And
well, I don't know very well because I was born there in a place called Hardwick Hall, a maternity hospital, which is now back to being it's a hotel now.
Right.
I've only been back once since I was born, and my dad took me to. They just landscaped it, and I went up to the reception and said, "I was born here. Can I have a wee?" But I don't really. That's the area. But then there was this weird period. Briefly talk about this. It was so strange. So a brief period in the 90s when the Northeast and almost everywhere I knew was the absolute focus of British politics. Yes. Blair, there was Mandelson in Hartlepool, there was Jack Cunningham, there was God, who else was it? Alan, what was his name?
Milburn.
Alan Milburn.
Yeah.
And Blair's election count was in Newton Aycliffe Recreation Centre where I used to go swimming. It was the strangest thing. Literally, the eyes of the world were on the wreck, as we used to call it. Very odd.
So where did you grow up? What was the...
well, in a place called School Aycliffe,
right,
which is about a mile from a new town, Newton Aycliffe, and a little village called Hyington where I went to primary school.
Opposite a mental hospital?
That was, yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know you talk a lot about class. You're comfortable talking about class and clear about class, as you would call it. Cost my parents tens of thousands of pounds. Forget me. They both say class, but I don't. And you know, clearly working class. Talking about how if it weren't for grants, you never would have gone to drama college or anything like that. You're not conscious of that kind of thing as a kid, are you? You don't. You're just conscious of your own family, and it's the only world you know.
Very much. I mean, I suppose you kind of. I remember at secondary school, for the first time, really encountering people who felt a bit posher. But that was just like that was like You were just aware of it. You weren't aware of it in a sort of class conscious way. It was just that they felt different to you. As my friend Michael once said to me about people who wouldn't watch Bullseye with their tea on their laps on a Sunday, and they just felt a bit different. Going around to someone's house and going, "Oh, this is a bit more tidy."
Right.
But then it's only later that you really become conscious of the way this country is governed.
Yes, and we'll talk a bit later about when in some ways it's gone backwards rather than forwards in the course of our lives. But your dad was a colliery engineer, and then an engineer at the hospital.
Yes. Yeah, my mum was she was a secretary in a paint factory.
So were you left to your own devices then a bit, or with your siblings?
Well, yes, I guess I was I was a very imaginative child. This is like some classic story. But I was always being told off for daydreaming, and I used to write. I wrote stories quite early.
How early?
And very. I mean, really, I won a competition when I was about 9.
You're jumping ahead. I've got that in my notes.
Yeah.
I've got that in my notes.
But it was, I just love
the anti-noise machine.
That's right, yeah. Someone's found that. Nothing's gone forever now.
No,
Someone found
days.
it in some records office.
Fantastic.
But it was, I was always sort of daydreaming and always making up stuff and watching the TV. I mean, I've told the story so many times, but I mean, one of my strongest childhood memories is my mum drawing the curtains back on the summer holidays because I was just watching the TV. Get outside, like a bat. Yeah.
Were there books in the house? Was it?
Yes. Not. My dad was a voracious reader when he was younger. He sort of stopped, and then in his retirement just went back to it. He haunted the library, but the books we had were all Dennis Wheatley's.
Oh, The Devil Rides Out and all that kind of stuff.
And Ian Fleming, and so I read a lot of those, and I'm still frightened of the covers of some of those books.
Absolutely terrifying. There's a scene in The Devil Rides Out, isn't there, where is it Peter Cushing's eyes? Or did you ever see the film?
Of course, I know. Backwards,
silly question. Of course, you thought you might. His eyes appear in the rearview mirror, don't they?
That's right. Yeah, no, it's Charles Graham.
Is it Charles Graham? There you go.
The most amazing bit is when they go to the Sabbath, and Christopher Lee. It appears, and Christopher Lee says, "The goat of Mendes, the devil himself." It's terrifying.
I watched it on the little black and white telly in my bedroom that I had for my ZX Spectrum, and I wasn't supposed to watch telly on. It was a Catholic household, and I actually put a crucifix under my pillow that night before I...
Well, I used to... Horror films are always on a Friday night where I lived. Appointment with Fear, it was called. And I knew everything about them, but I could totally cope with vampires, werewolves, mummies, whatever. But the devil was different. And I remember going to bed that night after that film, and I was properly terrified.
Yeah, same. And then the parents sent me to a school that actually had an exorcist. There's a monk, an official exorcist in the school. But anyway,
the school exorcist.
This is about you, not me. But we've established an early enthusiasm for the macabre, haven't we? And the darkness.
Yes, but it was a funny... I think a lot increasingly about how much you're drawn as a kid to... I was, but a lot of kids are sort of to the gothic and particularly to death. I mean, I was obsessed. I still am really obsessed with the paraphernalia of death. But the closer you get to it, the less interested you are.
Because it's an impossible thought. Everyone thinks they're a bit immortal.
Yeah.
I interviewed Eric Cantona once and asked him if he was thinking about mortality, and he looked me straight in the eye, absolutely deadpan. I said, "I am not going to die," and it was. I believed that he believed it.
That may be true.
If anyone can pull it off, he can. So, what were you like at school then, apart from the daydreaming? Were you a good student? Were you a good pupil?
I was a good boy. Yes, I was good. I mean, I was very good at English, history, art. Absolutely hopeless at maths. Still am. I love science. I still love science, but more as an abstract idea than being able to do it.
As an exponent.
Or as a mad scientist.
Yes, okay.
But I was very well behaved. But it's an interesting thing happened, and I've thought about this sometimes as well, that on my very last day at primary school, there was a boy in our class called Richard Sedgwick, and he had a brand new Parker, and I drew all over it with coloured pencils. And I remember I literally was called to the headmaster's office in like the dying hours of my time there, and he was baffled, and sort of so was I.
Because you never got into trouble before.
I think something must have broken out. It's strange, isn't it?
It is very strange.
It's where if there'd never be such a thing, if there was a film of my life, it's where it would start, because it's like the inciting incident.
Did you get punished?
No, I just remember him being very disappointed, but I was always afraid of getting
into trouble.
Or what we would say in the Northeast, getting wrong. When I remember first using that expression to my husband, and he went, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, he got wrong." And it only exists in that.
It's a new one
area.
on me.
Yeah,
it's a new meaning into trouble. Getting into bother.
Yeah.
The pleasure of writing stories and the pleasure of being in school. Did your mum and dad encourage it? What did they make of your curious interests?
I mean, they always they didn't discourage. I think it was always, especially about acting, it was always about just the insecurity of it and stuff like that. So that, I mean, it's an old cliche again, but they were just worried I wouldn't be able to support myself, I suppose. But I do have still got a school report, which I'm very proud of, from Mr. Todd. For English, it said what is the first bit of it? It says it's something like excellent imagination, even if his stories do resemble scripts for Hammer films.
Yeah.
And but that's what I used to do. Was I would write every single if the topic of the week was a day at the beach. I remember doing this. I wrote a story where a family found a head in a bucket, and I would literally just bend everything to suit. And my parents went to a parents' teachers' night, and when they came back, they decided enough was enough, and I was banned from watching horror films. And I was. It's an extraordinary story, this, because by horrible coincidence, the film that night was a very rare Hammer called The Revenge of Frankenstein. It's the second one. It's never on. And I was distraught, and they sent me to bed early, And I lay there sobbing about 10 o'clock at night. And then I heard them go to bed, but I knew my sister was going to stay up and watch it. So I just waited and crept downstairs. And that was the end of my ban.
Rubbish
so
punishment.
I did all right.
But I think I think I've seen you describe yourself as this is more geeky than sinister, even though the territory is dark. You were more of a nerd than a sort of
serial killer.
Well, I was thinking then what phrase I was going to reach for at that point, but sort of, you weren't pulling wings off butterflies.
No. I mean, it's a strange thing because, do you know, there's a larger conversation to be had about this, especially now that, again, you know, it's a hackneyed expression, but the geek has inherited the earth.
Very much so.
In terms of popular culture.
Yes.
I still find it extraordinary that people sort of refer to these things as cult.
Right.
I mean,
yes.
It's cult only in the sense that some cults, are, like Christianity, are actually worldwide phenomena.
Yes.
But actually, it's certainly back then it was more like it was more esoteric
niche.
to like these things.
You've also said, and I thought this was lovely, that you kind of had a consciousness that you were going to somehow prevail, that your imagination and you talked about getting hit in the face with a football and thinking,
yes.
I'll show you. And you knew that somehow you had a concept of your own destiny, I think.
I don't know. Right. I mean, a hopeful one. I mean,
because there might be a million people who've got a concept of their own destiny, and only two of them ever get anywhere. Yeah. But you did have it. You were very conscious of the world beyond home.
Yes, I suppose so. It's also, you know, it's a strange thing. I think, I would say almost all the gay people I know want to leave home, and it's not in any sense to do with not being happy there, or it's just a sort of escape thing. It's a world beyond. That's what it is, definitely. And I had it very early on. I was terrified of it. Ideally, I think what I would like was a sort of TARDIS where I could take my home with me. And I remember just the idea, of course, as it always, the idea of that breach is so extraordinary. And then when it happened, you just kind of get on with it, and suddenly life has changed, hasn't it? Just in that moment.
Yes. So secondary school was a bit tougher than primary school, I think.
Yeah, it was kind of, you know, it was a pretty grim place because it had sort of been thrown up architecturally. I remember there was no sense of what colours the walls should be to encourage learning.
Right.
There were some rooms which I think, in terms of sick building syndrome, that people literally would not want to go in because they were just like lemon and purple and but it was a good school, good staff, and I was pretty happy there. Really, it wasn't like that. It was just different. It was in that we went from a slightly idyllic primary school to the grown-up school, and it was a bit scary.
And were you already developing ambitions? If you so 12, 13 years old, if someone had said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" what would you have said?
An actor and a writer.
Already. So when did the writing bit kicks in very, very early? When did the acting bit first bite? When did that?
Well, it was school plays, you know, and stuff. But
even at primary school, like playing Joseph and the innkeeper.
Yeah, I was in fact I was the innkeeper.
Were you?
I was also a carpet bearer to the Tsar of all the Russias.
Yes.
In Baba Yaga and the House with Hen's Legs. And then my big break was in Junior 3, was a show called Journey Through Badly Dreamt, which they adapted from a radio kids series, in which I played Brains. You see,
gosh,
just like, you know, I look like Joe 90.
Yes,
and that was my big break. And then in secondary school, we did indeed do Godspell,
right,
and various other bits and pieces. And there was drama club. That was my great joy.
And you knew you were good. I mean, do you remember the thrill of the first time you made a house laugh or something like that?
Yes, and it was more. It's a funny thing. You end up. I suppose this is true for many things, but there's something incredibly pure about that first rush. I was talking to someone the other day about how I've just finished at the National, you know, and you always get sort of post-show blues, but nothing is as acute as the post-show blues after a school show, because it's the end of the world.
Yes, of course.
And that I remember, whatever, you know, after our 3 shows, the Sunday was just apocalyptic.
Because it's from everything to nothing. It's just from being full to being empty.
But also, you know what it is? I think a lot. It's that wonderful thing. It's a little glimpse of the adult world, and that's what you get excited about. Yeah. And suddenly, you're back to normal, and everything sort of shrinks back, doesn't it?
So precocious isn't the right word then to describe.
No. I was quite shy. I certainly wasn't pushing myself in that way.
And not a show-off either, outside of off-stage.
Well, in that funny way, a bit of both.
Okay.
I was a shy show-off. I like making people laugh, and I liked, but equally have a strange sort of inhibition about it as well. It was a sort. I was never bullied, but I knew it was a sort of anti-bullying tactic.
Sure, make them laugh first.
Yeah.
Yes. And you did. Yeah. You were funny. You did.
I believe I was. I have testaments. I was once. There was a little straw poll. I'm very proud of this. In our class, we were doing Lord of the Flies, and the teacher did a little poll as to who they would like to be in charge, and they chose me.
Oh, that's lovely.
I know.
Gosh,
I had the conch.
Yes.
They were silly too.
There would have been no book at all. Things would have gone swimmingly.
I'd have killed and eaten them all.
When I interview people, I don't know why, it's just a very personal fascination with how close to the surface the child is. With some people, it's hard to conceive of them ever being children, and then with some people, it's very much clear that the child is not very far from the surface, and your child is quite near the surface.
Oh God, yes.
Isn't it?
Breaking out constantly. Well, it's partly because, thank God, and I'm incredibly blessed that I'm doing almost exactly what I dreamed of doing when I was 8.
Yes.
I mean, with such specificity.
But it's quite incredible, actually, including some of the titles and even programmes that you would have been absolutely...
Doctor Who and Sherlock Holmes, two of the twin pillars of my childhood. So
would it be the Jeremy Brett one, or am I ageing you there?
No, Basil Rathbone.
Basil Rathbone.
And the books, really,
yes, of course. And then there you are. Was there... So at 8 or at 12... You thought it was feasible, did you? You genuinely thought it was plausible.
Well, this is an interesting thing about the class question, because it certainly seemed distant, but it didn't seem impossible. And I think a lot of that is down to what you were exposed to. You know, I think it's about representation.
Yes.
You have to believe that could be you. I think people often sort of slightly shake their heads about that idea, but it's absolutely true.
Yes.
That if you're a working class black girl, if you don't see yourself on the TV, you don't think these things are possible.
Yes.
And to me, as a working class white boy all those years ago, seeing, as I used to, studying the credits for Doctor Who and wanting to know what a producer did, what a director did, what a script editor did, all these things, by unpicking my favourite show. Weirdly, two of the most influential books of my childhood were technical books, The Making of Doctor Who and The Making of Star Trek.
Wow.
Both excellent books. And I pored over them, not just for the history of the programmes, both of which I love, but how they were done. And everything from the pitch to how they came up with the TARDIS, etc. And they were really useful to me, because you think, well, that's possible. I tell this story a lot, but my friend Arwell Wynne-Jones, who's the designer of Sherlock, he's a very proud Welshman, and he goes around schools to talk to kids about working in television and film. And when he goes in, he says to the class, who's ever thought of working in television? And like one person puts their hand up, and then he talks to them about carpentry, about electricians, about hair and makeup, and by the end of his seminar, they could all work in television, but they wouldn't think. They might not think that unless someone pointed out to you. And I think that's absolutely crucial.
That's
so
lovely.
I didn't think it was definitely going to happen, but I saw a way through, I suppose.
Well, I don't quite follow the because you thought that the people in the credits would be more like you, or I mean, because
it didn't seem like some sort of strange dream. People were doing those jobs. I knew full well that they lived in the southeast.
Yes, yes.
and there were certain things which I used to find as sort of exotic and Alien as the planet Skaro. It was the idea of having a lunch in a bistro in Shepherd's Bush. Exactly. And I do remember, I genuinely thought that Surbiton in The Good Life was made up because it sounded like suburbia.
Right, yes.
Yeah, I mean, the southeast was like Mars, really.
There is a Norbiton.
Oh, I didn't know.
Did you not? No, it's tiny, but they only discovered this quite recently. So if you'd known there was a Norbiton, you'd have been all right on
That's
the Surbiton side of things. And so, okay, so you know it's doable, or at least you think it's doable, and because you've studied the credits, it's almost like taking a vehicle together, so you know how you can put it back together. It loses mystique and becomes more achievable, I think. But it's still a fairly remarkable ambition for a lad.
Yeah, I didn't see a clear way through. I knew I wanted to act and write, but I didn't really know how. I remember, well, the obvious route was drama school. Yeah. But that was less to do with close study than just thinking that's the way you had to do it.
Yes.
And I took a year off, as it's not a year out, a year off. Yeah. And went interrailing. And then I went to see my old drama teacher who'd moved by then, and I auditioned for a couple of places and didn't get in, and then he recommended Bretton Hall, and I got in, and that's where I met Stephen, Reese and Jeremy.
Which was a degree course, so it wasn't traditional, it wasn't like a drama school.
Rishi Sunak wouldn't approve.
No.
It was very much a Mickey Mouse degree.
Well, I know Bretton Hall, believe it or not. I had my heart broken there in 1991.
By who?
Or was it 1992? I'll tell you afterwards. But you wouldn't have crossed over. You'd left by then.
89 we left,
yeah. So nearly. Gosh. Because it was set in Yorkshire Sculpture Park. It was a fairly magical place to
well, it's derelict now. They're going to reopen it as a hotel, I think, which is because the house is amazing and the sculpture park is amazing. It's quite sad. I popped back a few years ago and it was really just rotting, and I think they've knocked down all the old accommodation stuff.
Oh, really?
Now, but it was a strange place.
I'm never going to get my blue card.
It was a strange place. It was so isolated.
Yes, I hitchhiked there.
Did you?
Yeah, there was a bus from Wakefield Westgate, wasn't there? But if you missed
484,
that was it. But if you missed that bus, if you missed the last bus, I hitchhiked all the way from Kidderminster to there
for a girl.
Yeah,
exciting.
Yes and no. Interesting times. But tell me a bit about interrailing though, because again, from a very early age, you've got this dichotomy, haven't you? Like you just said actually about the TARDIS, wanting to take home with you, but also wanting to be a million miles away at the same time.
Yes, I mean, there's places I've still never been back to, like Amsterdam. I realised my friend went to Amsterdam the other day and he said, have you ever been? I went, yes. 37 years ago. I just, as I said it, I was like, what? That's ridiculous. It's true. And I went with my girlfriend and we had it was brilliant actually. There's still a few sort of magic things about that which I've never quite recaptured in travelling,
Yes. It
was just the sort of craziness of it. I'm very thrilled that it still exists, the idea, because it's such a good idea but and an increasingly small country,
yes,
a way of seeing the world, but
you weren't intimidated. I mean, you relished this, or?
No, it was a bit of both. The same thing.
Yeah.
I remember desperately wanting to do everything and yet being also pretty scared,
Yes,
I read all those things about people on Spanish trains being gassed and robbed,
Yeah.
But there were certain parts of it which have really stayed with me about just on a train across a sort of dusty plain. Or there was one particular bit when we got the night train from Venice to Vienna, and it was properly like being in a Bond film. It was very exciting. I just remember that.
And then from there to Bretton Hall, did you? I mean, when you met with the other lads who you'd go on to do League of Gentlemen with, was there like music in the background? Was there a sense of destiny or a sense of this is a very special group of people?
Yes,
from quite early doors.
Yes, I would say so, because in that strange way, I think someone said once, didn't they, that when you go to college, you spend 3 years trying to shake off the people you were close to in the first week.
Yes.
But actually, weirdly, Steve was in the same year as me, and we bonded immediately. Reese was the year below, and then Jeremy was at Leeds University, and he was introduced by a mutual friend. But there was a particular, there was a music to it because, and the big thing that bonded us was a shared memory. This is absolutely true. We've now got the specific date. A shared memory of missing bonfire night to stay in and watch Carry On Screaming, November the 5th, 1976. And we all did that. And therefore, in my head, I have a picture of us all glued.
That's lovely.
Isn't that mad? But we had such a shared sensibility of touchstones. And in that funny way, you sometimes think, you see a film, I remember thinking, like, whatever happened to Baby Jane, I was the only person in the world who knew that film.
Yeah.
And then you suddenly, it's a bit shocking,
yes,
but also rather amazing that someone else knows it better than you do.
And it's like it's like a turbo for a friendship. It's like you go further faster because you've got this shared enthusiasm
absolutely.
and sensibilities.
And you also start, for instance, and when I did Inside Number 9 a couple of years ago, and it's the episode about 3 old college friends, and we just go straight back in, no matter how much time we've been apart. And Diane Morgan, who was the other person in the episode, we were stuck on a pedalo, and she was wonderful. But I occasionally looked across at her. She looked at us like we were talking Japanese, because obviously we just had so many shared things.
That's a remarkable piece of fortune, isn't it? Really, it's almost a sort of sliding doors moment.
It's scary. It scares me.
Does it?
Yeah, because if I hadn't had that year out, I might. Who knows?
You'd have been in a different year, or you might have gone somewhere else. I would have been
in a different year, and yes, almost certainly. It's strange, isn't it?
And how quickly did you start collaborating?
Very quickly, actually. We did. So our friend Gordon Anderson, who was in the same year as us, he was very keen to put shows on, and we did a version of Rhinoceros, the Ionesco play, and we did lots of bits and pieces, largely because we very quickly got disenchanted with the course.
I was about to ask about
and in a slightly arrogant way, we thought we'll do the show, we'll do our shows.
Really?
But it was really, we had a great time, and then Steve and I did a show which we took to the National Student Drama Festival in Cambridge, 1988, and then we did another one the following year, and then and we took the first one to Edinburgh. That was amazing. Edinburgh, 1988, and we had the time of our lives.
You're the League of Gentlemen by now.
No. It was a show called Damage Your Children.
Right.
It was a game show satire. Extreme.
And did you write it together?
Yes, we sort of devised it, lots of us, but Steve and I were the sort of progenitors, and it was a game show satire, but a sort of Grand Guignol thing. It was incredibly gory, and it became, this is our first review, the Times Educational Supplement, Success to Scandale, the Success to Scandale of the National Student Drama Festival.
Fantastic.
And we somehow or other we took it to Edinburgh, and it became this thing, this phenomenon, and we were argued about and pilloried, and it was extraordinary. We were just sort of sat in the middle while people shouted over our heads. The funniest thing was, I'll never forget this, in Cambridge, we'd finished it, and Liz Crowther, the actress, was doing a show there, and I bumped into Ian Shuttleworth, who eventually became the Financial Times theatre critic, who was a huge supporter of the show.
Right.
And I bumped into him, and he said, "Crowther's in town." And he meant Leslie Crowther had come to see his daughter, and because our show was a game show spoof, he said, "I will move heaven and earth to make the show happen again." I said, "I think it's too late."
That must have been heady. That must have been mad to be the actual centre of.
It was nuts, and also because we were just. I wouldn't do it now. It was in such bad taste, but that's what you do when you're 22.
Yes, but it's also what you do when you've got each other to push you to new levels of daring, I think, rather than sitting there being your own censor or your own
I guess,
critic. So what was that like? How quickly did you start collaborating in such a, I mean, not quite unique way, because there are footlights and pythons before you, but this sense of, I'm going to say, alchemy, I think.
Well, yes, I guess it's a shared sensibility, isn't it? A shared sense of humour. It's a shared worldview, I suppose. The thing was, what eventually happened was, in 1994, Gordon, I just mentioned, he'd formed this company with Steve called 606 Theatre, Fringe Theatre Company, and they were really good, and they had a lot of very interesting successes with kind of forgotten plays. Gordon had an amazing nose for finding these plays which everyone had forgotten about, and they'd done this show called The Traitor, sort of Jacobean show, and there was a thing at the Cockpit Theatre in Edgware Road, a festival basically of good shows that not many people had seen, and there was a 5-night slot in which to resurrect this play, The Traitor. Anyway, Gordon couldn't get the cast back together, and he had 5 free nights, so he said to us, why didn't you put on a show? And then we did, and but because we'd all grown up with Python and Not the 9 O'Clock News, and the idea of a sketch group. Yes, that's what we decided to do.
And when he said you, he meant you four.
Yes, and a guy called Simon who did that, and then no more.
How were you a group by then? How were you? Because you and Steve did the show.
Yes.
How would he, when Gordon thought of you as coming together as a package, where had that come from?
Well, from he and Steve, I was in the first show that he and Steve.
Oh, I see.
Did.
Right, with 606.
And Reese was in another one, and we were just sort of working together, or just messing around together mostly. Yes. So it was just the natural sort of selection of people, I suppose.
We jumped ahead a little bit. I'm interested in how you left Bretton Hall together, effectively. With a sense that you were going to be now an actor and a writer. Yeah. This was actually going to happen. And did you start earning a living straight away? Did it?
No. I left. I lived in Leeds. I worked in a nursery. And
children or plants?
Children. Children as plants.
Nice. Yes.
The Triffids. A Triffid nursery. Do you remember Leeds Other Paper?
No.
You know that? No. It was a sort of anarcho-syndicalist thing, and I was the film critic, unpaid. I was given tea, I think. But I used to review films for that. I loved doing that. What a strange little period that was. So I lived there, and then I moved to Bristol, and I worked on Rolf's Cartoon Club. Gosh, can't talk about that anymore.
No, absolutely not.
It used to be. I've got a picture of him. I met Rolf Harris when I was 4, and it used to be my prized possession. Not so much now.
No.
And when I was living in Bristol, I was basically mostly in London because I was doing that. Steve and I resurrected the show the second show we took to National Student Drama Festival on the Fringe.
Okay.
And I just basically then realised I had to move to London, and that was the big, terrifying move. And then I was living here for about less than a year, and I got my first TV job, ironically in the Northeast. That's why I got it.
Back up again.
And then I got another one straight away, and I thought I was set, And then of course it didn't work for about 3 years.
But what did Mum and Dad make of all this? What did
they were very excited. I mean, the first one, they were extras in the first one.
Oh, really?
It was a show called Harry that Michael Elphick did after Boone.
Yes.
And it was set. I got it because they advertised for. It was Darlington, which is pretty close to where I'm from. Darlington-based actors. So I just sent a letter from my parents' address, And then the second one I got was a Catherine Cookson, so it was all the Northeast stuff. But they were very chuffed because, I mean, even though they were only little parts, but it was like the beginning of something.
And you're on the telly. The telly's
on the telly.
The telly's telly, isn't it?
Yeah. So that made a difference.
Where did you get an agent out of Bretton Hall, or did you get an agent from Edinburgh? Or
Edinburgh, yeah.
They came, someone signed you up there. That was exciting as well, though.
Yes, that was after the first year we did the League in '96. We got Vic and Bob's agent, Caroline Chignall, who's still my agent, and that was an amazing thing. That was like a little. fairy tale that, because we started doing the league stuff, and then we put together a kind of best of, and we got into the Pleasance in Edinburgh by the skin of our teeth, into the smallest venue, and then it just properly snowballed from there, and we had One Man and a Wet Dog, and then we bumped into some friends. We saw their show, they came to see ours, and then suddenly something started to happen, and by the end of that first Edinburgh, we had a radio show and Vic and Bob's agent, so that was a moment.
Were you ambitious?
Oh yes, but
for success, for renown.
I don't know what it's hard to say, isn't it, in retrospect, what the hell's going on in your head.
Yes.
I think a lot these days about retiring.
Do you?
No, not that I really want to, but just about the notion of it.
Right. Yes.
And what you actually, what you're doing, what are you doing it for?
Yes.
Is a very different thing when you're that age to when you're twice that age.
Yes.
You are looking. Of course, you're looking for vindication. You're looking for recognition. You're looking for something. You're looking for security. But it does change. I remember Toby Jones saying to me once. He said, "I spent so much of my career trying to get to the party, only to discover when I got there was nothing there." That's true, because there'll always be another party, there'll always be another hill to climb, but it depends what you define as ambition. I think we thought we had something to say, we thought we were funny, and we wanted that to be a thing, and of course it worked beyond our wildest dreams, but it wasn't naked ambition. I tell you a very revealing thing. We had very early on, when we were doing the show on the Fringe, we had a brief bit of excitement because Humphrey Barclay came to see the show, who was the legendary comedy producer, and he was at college with the Pythons, and I knew his. I mean, he was like a really famous name to all of us, and he was doing the new version of Saturday Live. Humphrey came to see it and loved the show, and we did the pilot with Armstrong and Miller.
Gosh.
But we did a couple of our sketches, but they absolutely bombed because basically it was a stand-up environment. And what I do remember very well is how nakedly ambitious all the stand-ups around us were. Actually, not Armstrong and Miller. They did a very canny thing. They used to do this brilliant Scandinavian rock band called Stryker.
Yes, I remember.
And so their little section was just perfectly formed, whereas ours was like stranded. It was just a floating sketch, and I remember being slightly afraid of all these comics. There was one guy backstage with a stopwatch who was timing Lee Hurst's monologues, and it was just like, this isn't more like competitive sport than anything fun. I was a bit disturbed by that, and I thought, well, I don't think we quite belong here, but we do have something to say.
And how did the tandem bit of it work? Because you've all got your careers which are burgeoning in other ways as well, and you said at the very outset the list of credits that you have would have kept young you absolutely fascinated for ages, and the League of Gentlemen blew up very, very quickly. Did you all put all your eggs in that basket at this point? Right.
Interestingly, we sort of made a pact, not in a not like a Blood Brothers way, but we made a pact that we'd try and keep focused. Actually, because in our early experience we'd seen other people who had a brief taste of success and had immediately gone off and done something else, and then their parent thing had sort of slightly withered because they weren't attending to it.
Yes, okay.
And so we just thought that this is what we must do. So we really did.
So that's pragmatism rather than cynicism. That is just knowing this is the vehicle that has got us to here. It would be silly now to go off riding around on other things, because so you're in your very early 30s now.
Yes.
Okay, so
now, yes.
That would be a TARDIS. And then it just went boom, didn't it? Because from Edinburgh to the radio in the same year, I think, on the Town with the League of Gentlemen's on Radio 4 in '97.
Yes, that was and then we won the Perrier in '97.
Yes, and then the following. So the first there in '95. and then the Perrier in '97, and then the telly in '99.
Yeah.
Were the first TV shows? You weren't doing sketches that you'd already done on stage. You were creating.
It was a mixture. We did
right.
well. The producer Sarah Smith, she did the radio show.
Yes.
And there was this brief and very intelligent thing, which of course they then abandoned, of trying to keep the same team together.
Yes.
And so the move from radio to television was kind of smoother than it might have been. But we came up with a lot of stuff for the radio show as connective tissue. I mean, that's when we came up with the whole idea of the town. It was like, because up until that point, there were certain sketches we did live, like The Local Shop, which had a narrative.
Okay.
But we wanted to find a vehicle, you know.
Of course, so, which is in a way from doing Saturday Live and realising you need your own building
completely.
You need your own.
That's what we used to do with our Fringe show.
Yes,
it was an
immersive experience.
Yeah.
Yes, and this is, I hope, not a silly question, but as this momentum builds, were there moments when you just look at each other and go, you know, the telly now and our own show? And
yes, but you know, in that funny way, you remember Stephen Moffat once wrote this wonderful column for Doctor Who magazine about. He said, "I'm nostalgic for now." And he wrote exactly about what was going on that week, and I remember being very struck by it because it's absolutely true. You sort of don't notice, and of course you don't, until you're slightly past it.
Yes,
that was a moment, wasn't it? That was a moment.
And now you sort of move into the bit where you're known. We've reached the part of your life where very quickly you all became. Did the TV show blow up immediately, or
yeah, it did.
It wasn't one of those sort of series 2 before everybody went nuts
it
for
wasn't.
It
wasn't. We won the BAFTA for the first series, and it was very
RTS, Golden Rose of Montreux.
Maybe. It was. That was. I was talking about it earlier yesterday. Jeremy and I were writing. And we got a call from Paul Jackson, who was then the head of comedy, wonderful man, and he said, "You've won the Golden Rose in Montreux. You've got to get to Switzerland." And he sent a car. We drove to Heathrow.
No, really?
And I just packed stuff. Didn't have any money or anything. And I remember we had to go to the desk. I felt like Jason King. I said, "I've got to get to Geneva tonight." And when we arrived, he literally had a wad of Swiss francs for us to get through the weekend. It was so weird.
How exciting!
Yeah. But no, it did. It sort of just suddenly happened. I think there was just that wonderful thing of it sort of grabbing the zeitgeist a bit, and but then, you know, in terms of recognition, it's different because especially if you're playing lots of different people,
yes, of course,
people don't necessarily recognise you, but then they do, which is even stranger. You know, you think I thought I was quite well disguised there.
Well, you were. But how then? This bit is perhaps the biggest mystery. How then did you turn the success of League of Gentlemen into essentially turning British television into a selection box of all your childhood favourites, which you could now just happily unwrap and tuck into?
Well, I mean, partly it's sort of persistence. Partly it's obviously it's just good fortune because, you know, I mean, Doctor Who was my all-time favourite show, and I didn't think it would come back.
Right.
And then one day suddenly I got a phone call saying it's coming back, and by luck, you know, because of the League, I guess, and because of knowing Russell slightly, I was asked to write for it, and then I was eventually in it, and you know, all these things, and then Sherlock was an idea that came from Stephen and I both working on Doctor Who and sharing a train carriage together and discussing Sherlock Holmes. And so, you know, it may seem like some sort of selection box, but there's a lot of sliding doors involved.
And
there.
serendipity.
Yeah.
And then we sort of get to where we are now, which is where you have this lovely portfolio career where you write and act and direct, and you choose projects on you've got you're in a lovely position. I know recently something fell through and you phoned up, was it Russell T Davies to say,
yeah, that's right, yeah.
Is it all over? So you do have that consciousness of fortune still.
It's that if it all stopped tomorrow, I'd be fine.
Yes.
But equally, it's the sort of freelancer's mentality. It never quite goes away. You're always afraid that I sometimes think when I'm feeling very overstretched, like now.
Yes, I was about to say
that I'm. But it's a strange thing how these things sometimes can stack up. I've literally just reopened my partner's play at the Criterion.
The way old friends do, which is a beautiful show.
Thank you
Absolutely
very much.
Beautiful show.
But that West End transfer, it's a short transfer, but it was unexpected. So
it's come from Birmingham. It's come from the Birmingham Rep via.
And then on tour. Yeah.
Yes.
And then the Unfriend, Stephen Moffat's play, which I directed in Chichester, is coming back, so I've got to do that.
Is it?
Yeah.
Gosh.
With Lee Mack.
Wow.
And Sarah Alexander in December.
Right.
So there's a few things which are. I'm very busy, but a lot of them are like projects from 2 years ago, which keep coming back.
So what do you go in and just sort of touch them up a bit? Do you?
Well, no, it's an almost completely new cast.
Well, with that new actors, it is, of course, it is, but not. So I'm thinking for
with Ian's play.
Yes,
it was. We had we spent last week just getting everyone back up to speed, and also because a lot of the tour was in thrust.
Yes.
It was about rethinking it a lot of the blocking for a proscenium arch theatre and stuff like that.
And then you also, when did you finish The Motive in the Queue? That wasn't
4 weeks ago.
Okay, so Christ, you really have. Do you say no to much?
Yes. I know it doesn't seem like it. I really do. But the curse, amazing first world curse, is an awful lot of it is so attractive. It's very hard. It pains me to when there are things I've had. Especially things I used to dream of doing when I was a kid, like writing the foreword to someone's book.
Yes.
And I get a lot of those requests. But you actually end up going, I've got to
Can't do that.
Because it also devalues it.
Yes.
If it's not everyone's book. But there are some things I had to turn down. There's an M.R. James collection coming out, and I had to turn down. I just didn't have the time to do it properly.
No.
And I really wanted to, but just couldn't do it. And then I think, well, also, the world still turns. No one really buys that much. If you get that in your head, you start to believe your own hype.
Up to a point, but there's little you, isn't there? And the things that you would have dreamt most about doing must be the hardest things.
It's always little me.
What do you do? What do you deploy? What critical faculties do you deploy when deciding what to do and what not to do?
Well, increasingly, it's something new. It's something that I haven't is a challenge, I suppose, but also I've turned down a lot of things which this is what always happens to actors, is you get offered the same thing.
I've done that.
You get offered the same thing in a different hat.
Yes, okay.
And a lot of those I find easy to say no to, but and also it's whether it's going to be fun. It's whether the people involved, you're going to have a good laugh. I'm shooting something at the moment in Dublin. I'm going back and forth slightly, and with Danny Mays, and I've worked with Danny like 3 or 4 times, and he's such a delight, and it's like it's not in any way like work,
right?
We just had.
That's a recurring theme in your career, though, isn't it? I know that not every job would have been like that, but quite you've been more than most. You've had
very lucky
collaborations.
But also why wouldn't you?
No,
if you have the choice, or if you have in any way a choice, as you say, it doesn't always work out that way. But my goodness, when you meet occasionally people who are so full of Sturm und Drang about the process, I just think, literally everyone around you.
In your business, I find that so irritating. In some businesses, in my business, it's fine these days. You can, but you're right. As if people are dragging around.
I know. And also, most people want to do a good job and go home.
Yes.
And the idea that you would. And that's not the same as not working hard.
Of course not.
Because it's very hard work. Or taking it seriously. But it's how you do it, isn't it?
Yes, of course it is. And also, the joy you bring to it, it goes back out again, I think, sometimes.
Yes, I really believe that. Yeah.
So as you look back then over that sort of, that window, that's, I guess, talking about the last 20 years, really, aren't we? Are there moments where... I love that line about being nostalgia for now, but do you see moments of advance? Do you see moments where almost if it were a video game, it's achievement unlocked or mission accomplished?
Yes, but it's again, without playing my tiny violin, it's not as easy as it looks from the outside.
No, I'm not suggesting.
No. I don't. I mean, even in terms of achievement, or you know, for instance, with my Christmas ghost stories, which have become a bit of an annual tradition, but it's very hard to find the money to get them made, and yet a lot of people just go, "Oh, why didn't you do that one?" And you go,
"Come on!"
I mean, literally, I just have to sit and bite my tongue. Like, if you had any idea how difficult it is to just get to scrape it together, and I think sometimes people from the outside sort of view it like that, and it's you know, I just had that.
People say, I've had a wonderful idea for what you should do.
But
next.
even after proven successes, it's not easy. That's why I messaged Russell that time, and he said, you know, only a couple of years ago when the original idea for It's a Sin had been turned down by everyone, and he absolutely thought he was done.
Wow.
And you know, and that's Russell, and so it's partly that thing of being haunted by the spectre of it, but also just by, you know, it happens to everyone.
Yeah, of course, and it drives you forward, doesn't it? It keeps you going. You mentioned death earlier. You have spoken a little bit about, I know you've lost quite a few family members lately, or relatively recently. Did I mean, your dad must have just found your success beautiful. Oh
yes, I bless him. I lost him 2 years ago. He was so funny, my dad. I mean, he really was. He was one of those dads, a very old-fashioned working-class dad. He would never really say it.
Sure.
I'd find out sort of through third parties. But he was. And actually, one of my fondest latter memories was when I played George III, The Madness of George III, and because he had dementia, but it wasn't terrible, but he was starting, and my brother and sister-in-law brought him to Nottingham to see the show, and he was sitting in the bar, and I just after press night, and he just went, "You were brilliant, son," and I honestly, that's the best review I've ever had. And he never said anything like that. It really got me because he just didn't. He found. And then after he died, I found this scrapbook full of stuff which I'd never known about. Everything, you know. But he was such a funny man, bless him. And the veil started to go, the filter started to go, you know. And I remember we went to see The Force Awakens in Middlesbrough, Odeon. And he'd started to just say what he thought. I mean, he was always pretty straightforward, but and we was about halfway through the film, at the top of his voice, he went, "It's the same bloody picture." And he was totally right.
He was bang on. This is where you got your film reviewing chops from back in the day.
They were all one-line reviews,
wasn't it? Yes. Yeah. When you talked about mortality in another interview that you'd done, and the way that it slightly dilutes your enthusiasm for the stuff that you were most for the macabre, you approach it very differently. What was the story about jumping in and out of graves that a director had once?
Oh yeah, yes, it was. I read about.
I found that very powerful. I found that idea of.
It was. I've got her name now. It was it was George Baker's memoir, and what was her name? Anyway, she was encouraging them all to jump in and out of graves, and he said, "Don't go looking for death.
That was it. Yeah.
It'll find you soon enough."
Yeah.
So true.
Gosh.
And profound, really. And yeah, you but also your taste change. I quite like that. I quite like being able to not hang on to the thing, you know. This is my favourite film when I was 10.
Sure.
Maybe it isn't anymore.
Yes.
And a lot of people, I'm not being pejorative about this, but we suffer as a culture, as a society, from arrested development in very many ways.
Yes.
I am like you, a victim of it.
Yes.
And some of it is glorious. Some of it is genuinely infantilizing and genuinely debilitating. So I think it's really good to be able to say, do you know, I'm not keen on that anymore, or I like something new.
Yes.
And it's very hard to push through that, even in yourself, because you have an innate conservatism.
Yes. And
you
comfort.
kind of want it. Whenever I was writing Doctor Who, I was always trying to push against my own nostalgia by trying to come up with a new thing.
Yes.
But it's really difficult.
Yes.
And, you know, I think there's something from the past in all my Doctor Who stories because you can't resist it. But at the same time, you're trying to actually say, well, once upon a time it was brand new, and that's why people are
Loved
nostalgic.
It. Yes, of course, because they'd never seen anything like it before.
And I think that for all the things that we love, all the cult things, like James Bond, is in a constant dichotomy of trying to be the same as the other ones, but trying to push itself forward.
Yes.
If it goes too far, people react against it.
Well, they feel cheated, don't they?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't go far enough, then there's some
then it's just
elderly gentleman in the theatre shouting out, "It's the same picture."
That's going to be me soon.
No, I'm sure it isn't. I think you're doing Mission Impossible. Has that hit the skids because of the strike? Is that?
Well, the first one's just out.
Right.
The second one I did my bit on last summer.
Right.
And there's meant to be more, just because they basically never stop shooting.
No.
But it has, yes. I mean, it wouldn't have been for a while anyway, but I think the whole thing is on ice.
And is that the Hollywoodist thing that you've done?
Yes.
Is that a different experience altogether?
Well, yes and no. I mean, partly because it's shot here.
Sure.
But it very much was, yes. I mean, just the scale of the production and the personnel involved, obviously,
must be mad.
It's mad, but but also it's quite heartening in that. First of all, the first day, my friend Indira Varma was in it, and neither of us knew we were in it. We saw each other across the studio, and she just went, "Oh, thank God." And we were just terrified. Yeah. And we were surrounded by all these not even starry, but American actors who you imagine are going to be like blue steel, and it turns out they're absolutely as shit scared as you are.
Oh, really?
And it was great. It was just everyone just sort of breathed out.
Love it.
Yeah.
We should talk a little bit more about the two plays before I let you go, because I didn't realise the Unfriend was coming back. I mean, until the second half of The Way Old Friends Do, I would have said to you, I'm glad I watched it, because I would have said, well, that's just a lovely, happy, jokey, funny celebration, isn't it? And then it takes a turn in the second half, and the Unfriend as well is, it's almost a sort of Ray Cooney farce with this dark.
But all the best things are, I think,
yes,
especially for comedy, it's got to matter. Otherwise, my absolute favourite episode of Steptoe is called The Desperate Hours, and it's the one where Leonard Rossiter and his old cellmate escape from prison,
yes.
And then they realise that they're better off inside with Albert and Harold.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like it's like Beckett.
It is, isn't it?
It's so bleak, But it's got to have something, I think, and like the idea of the Unfriend, which is a true story,
yes,
amazingly, is just so irresistible. And then what Ian's done with the Way Old Friends Do is, it's this lovely, irresistible idea of an ABBA tribute band in drag, but then this new element comes in, who is a sort of super fan,
yes,
and it sort of changes it.
It takes a turn.
Takes a turn.
Directing things you're not in, does that ever do? I mean, it's a fairly obvious question, but are there ever moments where you think, oh, bloody hell, I should have been in this one?
Sometimes, if the budget doesn't stretch, I have to be.
Yes.
No, I really enjoy it. I love doing both these plays, and it's a fascinating experience, I think. I've learned an awful lot by being in plays, and also just working with Sam Mendes, and actually just looking at how he runs a room is fascinating.
Yeah.
He has such a wonderfully light touch, and it's not about like hours of endless notes. It's just like slightly adjusting things, and I love that. It's been great. The only thing really, and I think it's really good for directors to also be actors, because you do have a natural sympathy. You also have a frustration, and I have to properly stop myself from giving line readings, because that's,
yes, of course.
But it's actually sometimes that's what you need to do. In fact, weirdly, I was talking to Ian about this the other day, about how actors do often separate into distinct camps. There are some people who you have to coax and persuade and say, let me try this, and other people really do just want you to tell them. When I was directing The Amazing Mr. Blunden for Sky a couple of years ago, I spent about 10 minutes talking to Simon Callow about this particular thing, and he went, "Do you mean quicker?" And I said, yes. He went, that was it. And he had no problem with it at all. That's really what it amounted to.
I love it.
I've learned that now.
So that's the way Old Friends do is at the Criterion for a bit longer. Is the Unfriend coming back there, or is it going on
It's going to the Wyndhams.
At the Wyndhams.
Next door
I guess,
to the Motive and the Queue, would you believe?
No. Gosh.
Yeah.
God, Lord.
It's crazy.
This plate spinning doesn't come close, does it? We're done. I need to ask you about ambition and about... Because sometimes I suppose that you just... I think on Desert Island Disc you said you'd like to play Jacob Marley one day, and then 10 years later you did.
Yeah.
So what is there anything left in terms of not parts... Well, actually both. Is there a role you'd really like to play?
Prime Minister.
What, actual real-life Prime Minister? Yeah,
I think it's time.
Yes, it is. I'll help you.
I don't know.
From the canon.
From the canon, Captain Hook I've always wanted to play.
You don't have a great urge to play Lear or anything like that? Or?
Well, playing John Gielgud, which has been an astonishing experience and continues to be, but actually Gielgud doing Hamlet is the closest I will come. I've no ambitions beyond that, I don't think, no. I don't know. I tell you what is lovely, because that play came absolutely out of the blue.
Yes.
I would never have anticipated it. So... That is a lovely thing. I think I'm ambitious for that, which is the unexpected phone call, because that's the best way to treat it, isn't it?
Long may your phone continue to ring. Mark Gatiss, thank you.
Thank you very much.